talk about topic number one, and that is tackling inflation. Consumer prices have been rising quite a bit, as you all may have noticed. Petrol prices in Mumbai, as an example, are now at 103 rupees per litre. Not just that, even our day-to-day essentials, vegetable oil prices, pulse prices, all of them have been rising. The latest CPI reading also gave out a figure of 6%. This indeed is very high. The question is that with incomes largely staying either flat or, in fact, in worst case scenarios, even being cut because of the COVID crisis, how can you protect the purchasing power of your money? How can you wrap your budget around the ever-increasing expenses when income is either, on the down low or is just where it was even maybe 2 years ago? We'll be talking about this, and for that, let me introduce on the show Mrin Agarwal, the founder director of FinSafe. Mrin, thanks so much for taking our time and joining us today on the show. To start with, Mrin, tell us, we've always looked at inflation as a very macroeconomic matter. We really don't think about the implications that it tends to have on our day-to-day lives. Maybe at the most, fuel prices is where we see it, but it's only recently when, the whole deregulation bit came in is when we actually feel the pinch of that too. So how is it that you are feeling the pinch of inflation today all the more than we did in the past?
Good evening, Mubina. Nice to be on the show today. Inflation really is the silent killer, and it basically impacts both our spending as well as our investments. In the long term, of course, it brings down our purchasing power. As you said, petrol at 103 rupees means that every commodity that we consume, which is vegetables, fruits, even packaged foods, everything that we consume is going to become more costly for us when we buy it, which means that it impacts our buying power. It really means that the money that we have, we can only buy limited amount as earlier. So it, of course, impacts our purchasing power in a very big way. As far as investments are concerned, if you are in fixed investments, it means that you're also earning a lower real return, right? Which means that the inflation adjusted returns are much lower than what they were earlier, which means your money is growing less. So it's a huge impact overall.
Okay, all right. Well, yes, it does eat into the purchasing power of the income, the money that you have earned. So now, Mrin, what can people do? Because on one side, expenses have increased, but unfortunately, incomes have either stayed where they are even 2 years ago, or they've actually, in worst case scenarios, been cut altogether, especially, those individuals who are earning their income from the unlocked sectors, right? They have not really come back completely to normalcy. They've not reverted to normalcy. Mrin, what can these individuals do?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's a very unfortunate and difficult situation. I think what's really important is to have look at where your expenses are going. Certainly, it will mean lifestyle expenses will have to be cut to the extent possible in order to meet necessary expenses. Of course, that's why we also recommend having an emergency fund so that, in these cases where maybe there's been a job loss or there's been a salary cut, the emergency fund could basically help tide in through part of the situation. And, really from a forward planning perspective, I think what is so important is to take the right inflation number into account when you're planning your investments. Try to save more because, this problem can happen at any point in time. So if you're able to save a larger amount than what you think you need, I think, that is one of the ways. But really, it'll have to be about really controlling expenses in a big way, because that's the only thing that you can control, right? I mean, you cannot control or you cannot control how you can get higher income, right?
Unfortunately, that bit at this point of time, at least, is beyond our control, given extenuating circumstances. However hard you work, it's That's the nature of the kind of circumstances we are in the midst of right now. So the only thing that you can do is save as much as you can, try and control your expenses, as much as you can. That's extremely important. Now, Mrin, for those fortunate ones out there who managed to keep their income intact, or the few lucky ones out there who have seen an increment as well in their income between last year and now, what are some wise decisions, what are some wise investments they can make that can actually help preserve the purchasing power of their money?
So I think the first thing is to really evaluate what are the existing investments that you have to see if they're actually beating the 6% number right now, which is the CPI inflation number that came out. And generally, we have seen that in India, people have about 70 to 80% of their investments in traditional instruments like fixed deposits, insurance, and maybe partly into real estate as well. But the allocation to equities is very low at 4 to 5%. And certainly, one of the ways to kind of beat inflation would be to allocate to instruments which normally do beat inflation, and that would really be equities. Of course, real estate does, but I would think a lot of people do have real estate already. And gold is another instrument, which generally tends to be able to beat inflation when the inflation is going up, right? So, but I would say have a higher exposure to equities. That's something that can really help you beat inflation.
Okay, so basically smart investments in, equities can really help you beat inflation. If you could give us through examples, Mrin, how has this happened in the past, and if you could just give an example. For example, if inflation was X, percent, equities gave more than that. Because the problem with equities is that, it may not do anything for a long period of time, and then suddenly, like a year like last, it returned what, 80-90%. So it does look very difficult to wrap our heads around that, this could actually help me do something, because we also forget that in March it had plummeted quite a bit. So if I have to pull the long term, then it's giving me a 30-40% return.
Yeah, so I mean, now basically what you need to do is that you really need to tie in your investments with your goals. And I've said this so many times on your show earlier that people still do not basically invest based on their financial goals, right? So that is the first thing. The second thing is that calculate the right amount to be invested. And the third thing is that, on a long-term basis, maybe you expect equities to give you a 10-12% return. So, the thing is that obviously if inflation is at 6 and you're getting 10-12%, then you're making a good real return. But the point really is that is why it is really important for you to tie it in with your goal, because if you don't do that, then you're always going to be worried the moment the equity markets fall, because you're going to start thinking that, oh my God, it's negative return. On top of that, it's not beating inflation. So I think it's really important to tie in investments with goals, figure out the right amount to invest into.
What is the potential meantime for fixed income? Because for those individuals who rely on fixed income, perhaps those who, are closer to their retirement, already retired maybe as well, a majority of their money lies in fixed income instruments, your fixed deposits, maybe a few debt funds as well here and there. And that's obviously not been good in this last 1 year. Debt funds as well, some of them have given negative return. Mrin, do you think that the potential for fixed income to help you at least cover inflation now is gone, that what we call as real return from a fixed income instrument today is in the negative?
It probably is for the short term. I mean, it depends how long this inflation is going to remain at this number. So one will have to see in the long term. But yes, it is a difficult situation, especially for the who depend on the fixed income, because you're kind of not seeing real returns happening. And again, I would say that you'll have to try to look at alternate sources of income. Maybe it could mean, renting out a part of your house, or, looking at some measures like that, because I mean, honestly, there's nothing that you can do about it at this point in time, right? So, and certainly I don't recommend, because right now in the market, there are a lot of fixed income instruments that are available, but which are very highly risky, and investors are getting into these there's a high risk to capital in these investments, and I would not recommend those investments at all for people who are depending on a regular income. So I think, looking at the entire situation, I think you'll have to find a way to augment income. You'll have to look at a way to, again, reduce expenses to whatever extent you can. And there's really nothing else. And that is why it's actually quite frustrating, right, for everybody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's been a conversion of you know just a couple of bad factors that really don't bode well for an individual. You have low fixed income, you have low income in general as well. And plus, of course, inflation is rising. I think the only reprieve may have come in from the fact that, okay, the equity markets have rallied. So those fortunate individuals and, the ones who had the hindsight to do that and put money in March have definitely managed to make some money. So hopefully that, I think, has at least helped them enjoy some of those gains. But again, having said that, Mrin, like we always say, when you invest in equities, it has to be in the long term, because just because you got your timing right this time around, it does not necessarily mean that you will keep getting it right. And that's the reason why when you do long-term, systematic, periodic investing, this is that helps you fight both volatility as well as inflation. Okay, I think we can take on board some questions and queries from our viewers then. Let's bring on board our first question. Sana Amreliwala asks us, what are some good options for regular income? I'm looking for my father, who is 67 and has 30 lakh rupees to invest. Okay, what would you recommend, Mrin? Where can he start off?
I think he should go with the schemes that are available for senior citizens. So you have the Senior Citizen Savings Scheme, you have PM Vaya Vandana Yojana, you have Post Office MIS, and of course, you also have the RBI taxable bonds available as well. So I think these are four options that are there. In fact, like PM Vaya Vandana and SCSS, the maximum limit is 15 lakhs. So I think you can just choose between any of these four options.
All right. So largely more, again, on the fixed income side, some of them, of course, have the government, the benefit of being totally backed by the government as well, which is another big plus. Okay, let's take on board our next question. Shyamala says, I'm a 55-year-old housewife and I've saved 30 lakh rupees from the income on my inherited agricultural land. She put this 30 lakhs in 3 debt MFs: ICICI Prudential Corporate Bond Fund, Axis Banking and PSU, and Axis Liquid Fund. So there's 10 lakhs each, and she put this in Feb 2020. So it's been more than a year now that she's invested. But she also started a monthly STP. So from debt MF, it moves to equity MF. So it goes from Axis Liquid Fund to Axis Growth Opportunities for 75 months. She started this 75 months in March 2020. Her investment horizon is 8 years. The purpose is wealth creation. What do you think of her plan? I mean, the good thing she did is she did not let it lie in a savings account. She at least put it somewhere. Though she put it, of course, in debt funds. But yeah, now she's slowly doing an STP. Is that a good idea, given the fact, Mrin, that she is 55 right now? And by the time her STP is done, it's 75 months. So, her STP as well will take around 6-7 years. By then, she will be more than 60. So, is this a good plan?
I mean, as long as she's aware of the risks, I think it's okay. And she's mentioned that it's for wealth creation. Also, if you look at the choice of the two funds that she's taken a corporate bond fund, which typically has more than 80% in AAA rated bonds. ICICI, again, they've not had any default in their corporate bond fund. It's a good fund, doing well. Axis Banking and PSU debt fund, again, a very high, good credit quality fund. The credit quality in this fund is very high, with banking and PSU typical AAA rated bonds. So, she's got herself, she's taken care of the lower risk aspect over there. And if she's putting some money into equities, and again, if you look at Access Growth Opportunities Fund, it's a large and mid cap fund with about 20-25% exposure to international stocks. So if you ask me, it's a good choice, because in that one fund, she's got the access to primarily large cap stocks, mid cap stocks, and international stocks as well. So if you ask me, I think she's got a good strategy.
Okay, so not bad. It's a good strategy put forward by Shyamla. All right, let's take on board our next question. Lakshmi Kurire writes saying, I'm here to know the best children's savings plan which would really help once they attain an age of 18 to 21. For example, I want around 50 lakh rupees after 20 years. So where should I invest and how much should I invest? When to start something like this? And what about small case investments, or can we go with covered bonds? All right, well, I'm not sure what she's taken into consideration when she has put in her mind an amount of 50 lakh rupees after 20 years, because, you know, Mrin, like our entire conversation is around inflation. I don't know what the value of 50 lakh rupees today will be 20 years later, or if, you know, Lakshmi has considered that inflation bit as well. But yeah, this is what she is targeting. It's probably just for the child's future. Yeah, Simran, what's your advice?
Okay, so the future value of this 50 lakhs in 20 years at the rate of 6% inflation is going to be about 1.93 crores. And she needs to be investing around 22,000 rupees a month, assuming a return of 10%. That's a very conservative return, right? So that's point number one. Point number two is that don't go in for any of those child plans from the insurance companies, because those are really not going to fetch you good returns. Stick with equity mutual funds. She's got a long-term time frame of 20 years. I would say go with the mid-cap funds if you can take the risk, if you can take higher risk. Else go with flexi-cap. And if you're not willing to take 100% equity risk, go with the balanced advantage fund. Now, with respect to small case and covered bonds, yes, there are lots of new products in the market which are catching the attention of investors. So how does a small case work? Well, it's basically a preset portfolio of stocks that you can buy. The point being, at the end of the day, you know, these are all recommendations. So people create these small cases. But the point is that you have to monitor it and you have to take the exit calls, right? So can you do that? Do you have the time? Do you have the resources? Do you have the information to do that? Also, you need to remember another thing very carefully, that every time you do an exit, there's going to be brokerage, and more importantly, it's going to be taxable. Now, if you just choose a mutual fund and leave, the mutual fund is going to do all this for you, and the tax aspect is also not going to be there every time the mutual fund sells a stock. So I think, you know, you need to evaluate whether you have the time, information, resources to be able to manage this. For some reason, there is this feeling, you know, because the markets have done really well over the last 1 year, and probably people might have made some fantabulous returns in these small cases. There is this general feeling that it's going to do better than mutual funds. So I want to tell this, that nobody knows how the future is going to be, and nobody knows whether it's going to do better. But the point is, you cannot compare it also, because everybody is taking exit calls at different times, right? So that's how you would evaluate whether you should get in small case. And as far as covered bonds are concerned, now this is another type of a NCD that's available, where there is an additional security which is there, which can be called in case of a default, right? So it sounds very good, and you know, you have covered bonds giving 9.5%, 10% return. But what you really need to evaluate is not the intermediary who's bringing this covered bond to you. What you need to evaluate is that who is issuing this covered bond. From what I see in the market, there is one covered bond where the NBFC that is issuing it is single A rated. So please remember that in case of mutual funds, they typically buy bonds which are AA minus and above. This is a single A rated company, which is in the business of issuing gold loans and business loans. So my point is, you know, it sounds really good on paper, but at the end of the day, when there is a problem, it is not easy to get money back. We have seen it in DHFL, we have seen it in ILFS, which were AAA rated companies. I would say, instead of trying to, you know, do these individual investments where your concentration risk is going to be higher, stick with mutual funds. You have professional fund managers, you have diversification, and you have low cost as well.
Okay. All right. Mrin, with that, we're completely out of time, so we're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you so much once again for joining us today on The Money Show. It's always a pleasure, having you on board, talking to us about prudent money management and, how to deal with the day-to-day, week-to-week situations that unfortunately we're all thrown into. The latest problem, of course, being inflation.